Welcome to NSG 229, Study Session 2, Developmental Theories. 1. Introduction. Various theorists have tried to describe growth and development from their own perspectives based on research findings, just like you try to find reasons why things are the way they are. They divided growth and development into various stages and described expected changes at each stage. In this study session, you will learn key concepts and stages of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory, Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. Learning outcomes. At the end of the study session, you should be able to stages of Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. 1. Explain the key concepts of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. 2. Explain the stages of Piaget's cognitive developmental theory. 3. Illustrate the developmental crisis and tasks in various stages of Erik Erikson's psychosocial theory. Cognitive child development theory. Jean Piaget developed an interest in the intellectual development of children. Based upon his observations, he concluded that children were not less intelligent than adults. They simply think differently. Piaget's stage theory describes the cognitive development of children. Cognitive development involves changes in cognitive process and abilities. In Piaget's view, early cognitive development involves processes based upon actions and later progresses into changes in mental operations. Key concepts of cognitive child development theory: schemas, assimilation, accommodation, equilibration. Schemas. A schema describes both the mental and physical actions involved in understanding and knowing. Schemas are categories of knowledge that help us to interpret and understand the world. In Piaget's view, a schema includes both a category of knowledge and the process of obtaining that knowledge. As experience happens, this new information is used to modify, add to, or change previously existing schemas. For example, a child may have a schema about a type of animal, such as a dog. If the child's sole experience has been with small dogs, a child might believe that all dogs are small, furry, and have 4 legs. Suppose then that the child encounters a very large dog. The child will take in this new information, modifying the previous existing schema to include this new information. Assimilation. The process of taking in new information into our previously existing schemas is known as assimilation. The process is somewhat subjective because we tend to modify experience or information somewhat to fit in with our pre-existing beliefs. In the example above, seeing a dog and labeling it dog is an example of assimilating the animal into the child's dog schema. Accommodation. Another part of adaptation involves changing or altering our existing schemas in light of new information. A process known as accommodation. Accommodation involves altering existing schemas or ideas as a result of new information or new experiences. New schemas may also be developed during this process. Equilibration. Piaget believed that all children try to strike a balance between assimilation and accommodation, which is achieved through a mechanism Piaget called equilibration. As children progress through the stages of cognitive development, it is important to maintain a balance between applying previous knowledge, assimilation, and changing behavior to account for new knowledge, accommodation. Equilibration helps explain how children are able to move from one stage of thought into the next, suggested that children think differently than adults, and proposed a stage theory of cognitive development. He was the first to note that children play an active role in gaining knowledge of the world. 2. Stages of the child's cognitive development. The sensorimotor stage, the pre-operational or preconceptual change, the concrete operational stage, the formal operational stage. 2.1. Sensorimotor stage. The first stage of Piaget's theory lasts from birth to approximately age 2 and is centered on the infant trying to make sense of the world. During the sensorimotor stage, an infant's knowledge of the world is limited to their sensory perceptions and motor activities. Behaviors are limited to simple motor responses caused by sensory stimuli. Children utilize skills and abilities they were born with, such as looking, sucking, grasping, and listening, to learn more about the environment. The sensorimotor stage can be divided into 6 separate substages that are characterized by the development of a new skill. 1. Reflexes, 0 to 1 month. During this substage, the child understands the environment purely through inborn reflexes, such as sucking and looking. Secondary secular reactions, 4 to 8 months. During this substage, the child becomes more focused on the world and begins to intentionally repeat an action in order to trigger a response in the environment. For example, a child will purposefully pick up a toy in order to put it in his or her mouth. 3. Coordination of reactions, 8 to 12 months. During this substage, the child starts to show clearly intentional actions. The child may also combine schemas in order to achieve a desired effect. Children begin exploring the environment around them and will often imitate the observed behavior of others. The understanding of objects also begins during this time, and children begin to recognize certain objects as having specific qualities. For example, a child might realize that a rattle will make a sound when shaking. 4. Tertiary secular reactions, 12 to 18 months. Children begin a period of trial and error experimentation during the 5th substage. For example, a child may try out different sounds or actions as a way of getting attention from a caregiver. 5. Early representational thoughts, 18 to 24 months. Children begin to develop symbols to represent events or objects in the world in the final sensorimotor substage. During this time, children begin to move towards understanding the world through mental operations rather than purely through actions. Pre-operational, 2 to 7 years. The child is engrossed in forming concepts through finding contradictions between new situations and their past experiences. The child thinks by using words as symbols, but logic is not well developed. 2.3. Concrete operational, 7 to 11 years. The child develops ability to communicate in language with shared topics, has more accurate understanding of cause and effect. The child can reason well if concrete objects are used in teaching and experimentation. She or he is able to learn operations of adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing, and also operations that involve logical thinking basic to classifying objects and understanding how they are related. 2.4. Formal operational, 11 years to adulthood. She or he attains fully matured intellectual thoughts. The child can argue, follow arguments, and see many varieties and alternate ways achieving their immediate intentions. Adolescents can think abstractly about objects and concepts and consider alternative outcomes. 2.3 Theory of Psychosocial Development. Erikson, 1902 to 1994. Theory of Psychosocial Development is one of the best-known theories of personality in psychology. Much like Sigmund Freud, Erikson believed that personality develops in a series of stages. Erikson's theory describes the impact of social experience across the whole lifespan. Thus, his theory encompassed development throughout the human lifespan. He identified a crisis for each stage or potential conflict or challenge. These were based on four major organizing concepts, namely stages of development, developmental goals or tasks, psychosocial crisis, the process of coping. Erikson believed that each stage of development was focused on overcoming a conflict, crisis. Success or failure in dealing with conflicts can impact overall functioning. One of the main elements of Erikson's psychosocial stage theory is the development of ego identity. Ego identity is the conscious sense of self that we develop through social interaction. According to Erikson, our ego identity is constantly changing due to new experience and information we acquire in our daily interactions with others. Each stage in Erikson's theory is concerned with becoming competent in an area of life. If the stage is handled well, the person will feel a sense of mastery, which is sometimes referred to as ego strength or ego quality. If a stage is managed poorly, the person will emerge with a sense of inadequacy. In each stage, Erikson believed people experience a conflict that serves as a turning point in development. In Erikson's view, (2.3.1) Stages of Psychosocial Development. Erikson's theory of psychosocial development is in different stages. They are as follows. Psychosocial Stage 1. Trust versus mistrust. Psychosocial Stage 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. Psychosocial Stage 3. Initiative versus guilt. Psychosocial Stage 4. Industry versus inferiority. Psychosocial Stage 5. Identity versus confusion. Psychosocial Stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation. Psychosocial Stage 7. Generativity versus stagnation. Psychosocial Stage 8. Integrity versus despair. Psychosocial Stage 1. Trust versus mistrust. The first stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development occurs between birth and 1 year of age and is the most fundamental stage in life. Because an infant is utterly dependent, the development of trust is based on the dependability and quality of the child's caregivers. If a child successfully develops trust, he or she will feel safe and secure in the world. Caregivers who are inconsistent, emotionally unavailable, or rejecting contribute to feelings of mistrust in the children they care for. Failure to develop trust will result in fear and a belief that the world is inconsistent and unpredictable. Psychosocial Stage 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. The second stage of Erikson's theory of psychosocial development takes place during early childhood and is focused on children developing a greater sense of personal control. Erikson believed that toilet training was a vital part of this process. Other important events include gaining more control over food choices, toy preferences, and clothing selection. Children who successfully complete this stage feel secure and confident, while those who do not are left with a sense of inadequacy and self-doubt. Psychosocial stage 3. Initiative versus guilt. During the preschool years, children begin to assert their power and control over the world through directing play and other social interaction. Children who are successful at this stage feel capable and able to lead others. Those who fail to acquire these skills are left with a sense of guilt, self-doubt, and lack of initiative. Psychosocial stage 5. Identity versus confusion. During adolescence, children are exploring their independence and developing a sense of self. Those who receive proper encouragement and reinforcement through personal exploration will emerge from this stage with a strong sense of self and a feeling of independence and control. Those who remain unsure of their beliefs and desires will insecure and confused about themselves and the future. Psychosocial stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation. This stage covers the period of early adulthood when people are exploring personal relationships. Erikson believed it was vital that people develop close, committed relationships with other people. Those who are successful at this step will develop relationships that are committed and secure. Loneliness and depression. Remember that each step builds on skills learned in previous steps. Erikson believed that a strong sense of personal identity was important to developing intimate relationships. Studies have demonstrated that those with a poor sense of self tend to have less committed relationships and are more likely to suffer emotional isolation, loneliness, and depression. Psychosocial stage 8. Integrity versus despair. This phase occurs during old age and is focused on reflecting back on life. Those who are unsuccessful during this phase will feel that their life has been wasted and will experience many regrets. The individual will be left with feelings of bitterness and despair. Those who feel proud of their accomplishments will feel a sense of integrity. Successfully completing this phase means looking back with few regrets and a general feeling of satisfaction. These individuals will attain wisdom even when confronting death. Table 2.1. Showing the stages of a child's psychosocial development. Summary. 1. Jean Piaget developed an interest in the intellectual development of children. He came up with the cognitive child development theory based upon his observation. He concluded that children were not less intelligent than adults. They simply think differently. Key concepts of cognitive child development theory include schemas, assimilation, accommodation, and equilibration.